Greetings, Kindred. I am voivodemekhet, and welcome back to our World of Darkness, and another episode of us going through Chapter 4 of Mind's Eye Theater, Vampire the Masquerade, Laws of the Night. Now, today we're going to be going over one specific thing that is found in Chapter 4, and that is the optional rule for rapid mass combat resolution for player versus player, PvP combat. Now, I've decided to make this one a set read exactly what it says, because this is one of those things that I don't know how many people are going to want to jump right into this one. This optional rule is sketchy. It's sketchy at best, but it also is something that would definitely resolve a situation involving a lot of players incredibly quickly. This almost has a resolution of Nordic LARP feel to it, where there is no actual, there's not like a lot of mechanics or tests for this one. It's something that just handles getting the situation taken care of as fast as possible. Anyway, I guess we're just going to jump in and look at what this says word for word. And as we go through it, I will stop and give my 2 cents as we handle the description. Vampire the Masquerade is not a game about clashing armies fighting for supremacy. Combat within this setting is intended to support themes of intrigue, political ambition, and personal horror. While it is mechanically possible for large groups of players to conflict violently, some troops do not prefer that style of gameplay. This optional rule is designed to assist troops that would prefer to handle mass combat narratively. Okay, so first thing I want to point out is this is not a dead set rule that has to be followed. This is an optional rule. It says so straight out that there are some troops who may wish to go through this on a turn-by-turn basis. I think when it comes to important things like player death and game-changing situations, I think that most groups would like to do that. But this offers an optional choice. We define mass combat as a fight involving more than 10 player characters, 11 plus. Mass combat between vampires is inherently and automatically dangerous, both for the participants and for the masquerade. Engaging in extremely lethal pitched battles flies in the face of vampiric survival instincts in modern knights. Basically what this portion is saying is that vampires in general probably would not find themselves in this situation very often. Primarily because there has been about 500 years of intense doctrinization in their mentalities, telling them that out in the field, street battle between whole coteries is just not something that would revolve around survival of the group in general. The idea that the Second Inquisition or other groups like that could come in and end up ending things, even if they got out in time, it's still going to rouse suspicion in the groups that may be hunting them. Storytellers using this rule for their game should make it clear to all players that it is in effect. As this is an optional rule, even if they generally use it, the storyteller may choose to not implement it for combat scenes that are important to the game's narrative. For example, running a mass combat for a practice seizure, or a blood hunt without this optional narrative resolution system may make sense in the context of the game. Storytellers should use their best judgment and make the choice based on what best serves the story. As this system may involve consent-based character deaths, storytellers should explain this system to their players clearly so that they understand how it works and can make an informed decision. That's something that's strange in World of Darkness games, consent-based character deaths. This is something that you need to understand as a player can, and most likely will, involve the end of your character. There are certain stipulations that come into play here that can change things, but that is the reason why I have decided to come in here and discuss things effectively paragraph by paragraph, giving my 2 cents as we go through things, because there's a lot in here that can actually be misunderstood involving this optional rule. The steps for this system are as followed. Step 1, mediation. Storyteller attempts to help players resolve a story outcome for the fight by consensus. If that is not possible, proceed to step 2. In other words, what this is saying is that the storyteller can come in and ask narratively what the group, everybody who's involved, really wants to see. If there is a combat involving large groups of people, you ask one side what exactly they're hoping, and then the other side what their intentions are, and then just try to find a compromise in the middle so that you can have one simple way of going about things without moving on to step 2. If that is impossible, and for the most part I see it being that way, because people want their side of the story to come out on top, then you would move on to the next step of this optional rule. Step 2, players opting in or out. When 10 or more player characters are going to be involved in a PvP combat, the storyteller shall pause the scene. All involved characters are given the opportunity to freely fair escape, representing their survival instincts, leading them away from clear and obvious danger. This system defaults to final death. However, if all players on both sides involved in the combat agree that their intentions are non-lethal, they may fight to torpor. Once all players have had a chance to opt in or escape, proceed to step 3. Step 2 is vitally important because it has a lot to do on whether or not this scene is either going to progress or not. The first thing that needs to happen after mediation of step 1 is to find out which characters are going to yield to the instincts to not be involved in the situation. There's a good chance that just the leaders of groups may be wanting to have this fight, in which case there's clear opportunity for the other players to decide they are going to hide or going to leave. This is one of the few chances in a combat situation where you can declare fair escape regardless of any present danger. Your character can just opt out of the combat altogether, in which case the storyteller will then count how many people are involved, and if it is 10 or under, you are now back in standard combat and do not have to worry about this optional rule at all. The other thing that the players get to decide in this step of the combat on whether or not it is going to be lethal or not. If you have decided that this is going to be lethal player versus player combat, then it will decide that everyone chosen in the further steps from this die. And that'll be the end of their characters. You do not get to bring them back at this point. It's death. If you decide that it is non-lethal combat, then the characters could be torpid, which can leave some complications on getting those characters back into play. But torpor is a lot less serious than final death, as we'll see in further steps. Step 3. Count the characters. If step 2 leads to 10 or fewer characters opting into the mass combat, then the storyteller should resolve the combat with those players using normal mechanics and proceed no further with this optional rule. If step 2 leads to 11 or more characters remaining in the conflict, then the storyteller shall have them organize themselves into groups with the allies who intend to fight as a team. The storyteller should clearly tell the players that this is the last chance to declare fair escape. Once the last chance is given, characters are locked in the fight until there is one surviving team left, or all teams agree to end the conflict. Proceed to step 4. As much as I'm not a fan of this optional rule, I do like the fact that it gives you yet a second chance to ask players if they're in or out. It's basically just okay, we're going to do this. Who wants out? Cool. Moving on to the next step. Are you guys sure you're still involved? I like the fact that you can do that because it does strike home the fact that there are going to be severe repercussions for this. In this step, aside from that, you're going to split the group into teams. Who is fighting with who? As in, who's on the same side? If it is a simple one team on one scene, the Sharks versus the Jets West Side Story stuff, you split them up like that. If there happens to be more than two groups fighting, you set them up like that. Basically, you want to know who is fighting for who and what everybody's intentions are when it comes to battle. Step 4, narrative resolution. The battle begins. Describe the chaos and violence of a large group of vampires fighting for their lives. By default, a round of deaths occur in the battle. Each team will have one player narratively describe how their character is destroyed in the messy carnage of mass combat. Players should be given the opportunity to volunteer and tell a story about how the death occurs. For example, did the character heroically sacrifice themselves to protect another? If no one volunteers, then the storyteller shall determine which characters die randomly. For example, by rolling a die. If all parties have agreed that the fight is to torpor, follow the rules above, but characters are put into torpor instead. After each turn, give the group a chance to retreat. If all groups agree to retreat, the combat ends. If they do not, another round of narrative death occurs. Each team loses one character per round until all surviving characters on all teams agree to retreat, or until only one survivor from one team remains, at which point the combat ends. Round after round, you call for retreat and also player deaths, one from each team. This is something where the teams have to get together and decide which one of their group is a sacrificial lamb for the narration. It's a little disturbing, but it's also accurate when it comes to a battle in Vampire. You are going to see a 50-50 shot of who's going to win. Now, if you play this out, the deaths that happen each round could be all on one team. This is to keep things fair and to keep things flowing. Again, not a huge fan of this part of the system, but it is an optional rule that can be used. For simplicity and speed, all characters who participated and survived a narrative combat where final death occurred fill half of their health levels, rounded down, with aggravated damage, and gain 2 stains. If the fight was to torpor, then all characters who participated and were not rendered torpid fill half of their health levels, round down, with normal damage, and gain 1 stain. When everything is said and done, and people have either run away, which is given the chance every round, or there are only one survivor, the survivors involved in this narrative mass combat will all receive half of their health track filled. If it is a fight to the death, it's aggravated damage. If it is a fight to torpor, then it is normal damage, rounded down. Half of their life. And then also there are stains given to represent the heinous things that they have done during a fight with their own kind. As I said when we were going through this at first, Laws of the Night is not a highly intense and realistic combat simulator. That's not what this game is for. The game is set to be a game of personal and political horror. So, on the occasions where a mass combat like this does come up, it is something that the storytelling team and the players would typically be attempting to get this out of the way as fast as possible. No one wants to drive a good distance just to play an aggressive game of rock, paper, scissors at each other. System notes. NPCs involved in the fight may also die at the storyteller's discretion, but they can never take the place of a player character's death. One player character always perishes in each turn. Storytellers should avoid allowing abuse of this system. For example, players using throwaway or one-shot characters as sacrifices would be an abuse of the system. The storyteller has the authority to say no for the good of their game. Or they can simply run the combat mechanically at their discretion. So that last little bit basically just talks about how an NPC does not have the right to take the place of that sacrificial death. That it has to be something that holds true to the actual consequences of this system in general, which is against the players, not the NPCs. Also, the fact that the storyteller can decide whether or not something is going to happen based on whether or not a character does actually hold weight. The idea of somebody who brings in a character just to gain XP, or a character who is there just as a frivolous one-shot, such as somebody who's visiting or something like that, is not going to be the same weight as a player who's actually holds some kind of emotional attachment to the system. Like I was saying, this optional rule for mass combat is not something that I see myself using. Of course, there are always times when I could be very wrong on that. I could actually decide to use this at some point in time if I end up having a large enough game where just the narrative needs to be told, or perhaps even a grand finale of a storyline. Who knows? There's always options. There's always reasons why something will come up. On that, I want everybody to stop and think about this optional rule for mass combat. Is this something you would use? Do you find this to be a fair way of handling things? Personally, I think it's fair, but fair does not always tell a good story. With that, what you think about this, please drop that down in the comments. I would like to really get community feedback on an optional rule that has this much magnitude. A good percentage of the time when this rule is pulled out, multiple people are going to lose their characters. If you think this video was helpful at all, please drop a like. If you think it could help yourself as a player or a storyteller or somebody else that you might know, please share it and get this information out further, because I'm trying to make it so that we have more of a LARP community inside this group. With that, I am voivodemekhet. Thank you for joining me in our world of darkness with this look at Mind's Eye Theater's Vampire the Masquerade, Laws of the Night, Long-Winded Sense look in Chapter 4. I believe we're going to be going over health in the next video. So thank you very much for joining me, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Good evening.